Daniela, let's start with a brief overview. What is Defined AI? What are you all building?
Defined AI is the largest marketplace of data in the world. We are still obviously growing it. We are very strong in human-computer interaction applications data, so speech, text, image, and video. But we are quickly moving to other verticals, healthcare, sustainability, and manufacturing, essentially allowing every builder of AI to have a jump start with fully consented data, not fully anonymized, high quality, multilingual, but data that is ready to be ingested in a machine learning model. So you can think about anybody building AI, they always start with the problem of data. And the problem of data oftentimes is also the legitimacy of that data. Where does it come from? Is it diverse enough? Is there bias or not? Is it representative? Is it transparent? Is it transparent? So that's what we provide. And by we're very aggressive on our partnership strategy now. We understand we cannot build a marketplace alone. We have to bring a lot of people to the game. And the interesting thing is that because we are the first ones building a model like this, a disruptive model of monetization of data, so we are not an open source marketplace like GitHub is or Kaggle. It is monetizable, but the interesting part here is that it allows a lot of these partners who are sitting on data that they don't know it can be useful not just for them but for other industry sectors to really accelerate their exposure to AI building.
When we talk about the marketplace, it's the one of the iterations of Defined AI. So talk about what kind of iterations you went through with the company and why did you decide to focus on this type of business model and this type of value proposition?
Absolutely. Yes, we started as a factory of data, which was basically simulating data. This is not synthetic data, it's data simulation, which is the closest to reality in the space of human computer interaction. So think about simulating conversations between people over a customer support type of interaction, or simulating content reviews, creation of reviews, parallel corpora for machine translation. So really starting in one source language and translate it in 104 languages, which we did for a big customer as well. So we started as a factory of data on top of a crowdsourcing platform, which was new in terms of getting it done right for human languages. Crowdsourcing pretty much was invented by Amazon Mechanical Turk in 2015. I'm sorry, in 2005 with Mechanical Turk, and it quickly, and other companies tried the model like Crowdflower, but they never mastered the complexity of languages. Because dealing with thousands of people online and having to qualify them to create, simulate data assets that are relevant for AI was always a big challenge, and controlling fraud and controlling language skills, controlling domain knowledge, etc. So we Defined AI started out of my frustration back when I was for 7 years at Microsoft, and where we were trying to build our own crowdsourcing platform, but not fast enough, in my opinion, even though we had all the money in the world, especially dealing with the consistency across 100 markets and how to crowdsource, and why crowdsourcing is important in the language component part, because you can't build language models or acoustic models or without the input of real people. that actually speak the language in their country and have all the cultural reference that they live in. So crowdsourcing had to be the answer. There are other models of crowdsourcing, but unpaid. I never thought that was a good strategy to go. I mean, obviously, Google, Amazon, the big five tech companies built a lot of their models, language models, by collecting data without consent before, because there was not such thing and awareness, and getting a similar crowdsourcing model, but unpaid, or through gamification or something like that. So I never believed that unpaid data yields quality. Actually, you deal with 10, 20% of quality, everything else is garbage. And sometimes that approach actually is much more expensive and time consuming. So we created something very purposeful to solve that problem that I was dealing with when the last years of Microsoft was dealing with language expansion and data expansion, managing $14 million in budget, and we couldn't spend it. We couldn't spend it because there was no one in the world able to deliver the amount of data we needed at the consistency and quality we needed. So that's how Defined AI started.
Gotcha. And after a few years of offering the sourcing services to the companies, you decided now to expand the offering and offer the marketplace. So, what was the trigger for that?
The pivot was not so much in the offering, but in the business model. What we needed to do was to scale our offering in a way that every time we were requested to source data, we were doing it a one-off with relatively low gross margins. So we are a VC-backed company. I was able to raise 81 million in VC capital, and in every round, my promise is that we were going to be able to meet the acceleration curve of margins were going up. Everything is going to be more efficient. Everything is going to be cheaper. The reality is AI, because it evolves so fast, the moment we were done optimizing in a workflow, a new demand would come in, and we were always working on optimization of workflows. So the click was on Series B. I said we're going to stop offering one-offs and exclusive rights of data from now on, and we hopped into a very large IBM deal. From now on, our data will be cheaper, sold cheaper, which at first was a big hit for us. But we can now own the rights and resell it over and over, and gross margin. So you get a recovery of your asset value on the second purchase and the third purchase. And on that note, of course, we also we're seeing compression of pricing by other competitors. Competitors that were starting to show up in other regions of the world with exploiting, and we are coming soon with an article about that, exploiting resources in developing countries at under, in my opinion, not acceptable pricing. But with COVID hitting, with the global economy suffering, people were accepting completely low fares, low payments that are unseen and should be told. So with all the competition coming in on squeezing margins and us starting to lose deals for in that sense, and at the same time with putting a non-exclusive deal and convincing customers that data is always deprecatable, you're not, an illusion that you have a competitive advantage just by purchasing this exclusive data set, because in a year you need an update, in 6 months you need an update. So it's not a good investment. It's just like leasing a car. It's not a good investment. You need to keep constantly buying more. So this was a disruption in our market. Currently, our competitors are all coming to us after, can we be your channel? We don't have off-the-shelf data. We want your data. So this is the biggest change and the disruption.
And it makes sense. Now that you can offer the data to multiple customers, not from the pure margins perspective, but from the value perspective to the world, to those businesses, they don't have to pay again and again, each one of them separately to collect the data. They can now piggyback on this mutual or common budget that you use to build it. And now when you update this data, they can get more quality, more new
Faster, because it's
capabilities.
there, also faster and cheaper, which was another entry point. The world became more competitive in, obviously.
It has. And so now you work with speech, text, image, and video. You talked about expanding into other verticals like healthcare and manufacturing, but talk about your typical customer profile.
So let me start with the customer profile and the region. First of all, our customers of the marketplace are all American companies. Why? Because, as I've been saying for a long time, only the US and China are building AI. The rest of the world face a huge gap between the building and the buying. So the rest of the world will buy, and they continue to go on the buying track. The US and China are building. So our customers are American companies building AI. Started again 2, 3, 4 years ago. It started to be the Fortune 500 companies with the marketplace that we have now, lowering the entry bar to access to data. A lot more startups and growth companies are able to buy data from us because that was the other thing. The marketplace democratizes the access to building AI faster, because you don't have to always. The upfront cost was huge for most of the startups or growth companies, so we were able to double our customer list from last year to this year, double really, and grow our revenue in the marketplace in the 500+%, just in the marketplace, with a gross margin profile of 80% gross margin. So now bringing partners a little bit. So this is the profile. We plan to expand the marketplace to not from data only, but from models. That is a different entrepreneurship, because there are other players out there building model marketplaces of the sort. They are all very scattered. Again, it's a very good, if we establish ourselves properly in the data space, it's very easy to use them even as a partner channel, a channel partner, because they are all struggling with the data component side. But the plan is the marketplace serves the builders, and the rest of the world is very far out from building. This was also our conclusion.
This is an interesting one. We'll talk about it a bit later, I think, in our conversation. But for now, what are the typical sources of the data? You mentioned that some of the data is simulated and built by you through crowdsourcing. You also separate simulated data from synthetic data, so maybe talk about the differences and more general about the rest of the sources of the data for the marketplace.
Actually, we now have 3 sources of data in the marketplace, although the third one is not yet materialized. The first one is real data. So we are actually able to now bring partners with real data. Think about live meetings. Think about telephony conversations, or actual content creation. So people who provide who have a portfolio of pictures, or have people creators. So actually real data. That's one side of it that needs to be anonymized. There's a whole process for that, and needs to be consented and legally protected. But that's one source that we are now bringing to the marketplace. The second source is simulated data, which is our business. We have a factory, a workflow and Nivo platform that pairs people together or alone to produce content in a simulated way, because doesn't come naturally to them. They have to be guided. They have to be sometimes they're role playing. Sometimes we hire actors. Sometimes it's people with hobbies in a certain area that join something that they are interested in providing, even if sometimes it's annotations of pets, people who are very expert in dog breeds and are doing annotation of pets. So this is the simulated. And there's the synthetic data. The synthetic data is a very interesting world that with the generative model explosion, and especially the viral rise of the last 2 weeks of Lensa AI, this is where these are all, and DALE from OpenAI, these are all the examples where it will be possible to build from real data or simulated data infinite combinations of other data, including at text level, which it's very challenging to do. So language text. Image is the obvious and shiny object, because you suddenly can see combinations and variations of yourself, or of the objects in a room never imagined, but still within the rules of our earthy gravity and physical rules. But this is where applications like that will create infinite outliers of data that normally you can even get from reality, and you have gaps in the reality. To fill the gaps, you will need synthetic data. So the synthetic data side is something we want to bring, and we will bring next year. And that also aligned with it has to start with the real and the simulated data, which again we have. So this is where, well, NVIDIA is saying that 90% by 2030, 90% of the machine learning models will be built in synthetic data, and they have all the digital twins strategy that is all built on synthetic data. So
Right. They want it to be that way because it's going to propel their technologies forward.
of course,
And there is a lot of reasons to believe that, yeah, we can leverage our computers to create more synthetic data, especially for, as you say, edge cases. And for that emulated or simulated data, you've been doing it for a while, using crowdsourcing to do that. What is the hardest thing there, or what is because it is hard to build a quality stream of data from that crowdsourcing machine. What were the most challenging things, most interesting things you had to work on to make the result really shine?
the crowdsourcing process has different challenges. The first one is actually sourcing the right people, and so sourcing the people is we usually use a normal ad campaign targeting certain people. But even more challenging is to retain the people. So oftentimes, especially when you're doing a biometric collection, you need Artem to come back in a week and do another recording or another video capturing, because we are observing your changes, and over the day, over the weeks, your mood, your voice changes, etc., etc. So the hardest thing in crowdsourcing is retaining the same person, because it's a very transactional type of micro task. The second challenge is paying in certain countries, and I know it doesn't sounds like it's a solved problem, but it's not. We you cannot operate in certain jurisdictions without having a number of entities set up. We're not setting up entities around the world just left and right. So finding the right partner that legally and fulfills the legislation and the labor laws, and also has a cap on how much time a person can work within the jurisdiction without breaking or becoming an FTE of the company. So all of these are logistic and very challenging problems. Another more technical and challenging, interesting problem is detecting fraud. How do we know that you are not opening 5 accounts and you are collecting 5 times money when we need only one sample of you? Because that's how. So that's the technical challenging that our machine learning scientists love. It is a combination of authentication technologies and correlating your bank account with your IP, with your input, with some similarity of inputs. But so the whole fraud detection is what we call spam fraud detection. Gave us a number of patents. Very normal and expected problem, but challenging, believe it or not. And finally, the qualification of the person. Creating an algorithm that is watching what you're doing and tells you to stop and come back later, because we are constantly assessing quality of you, and it's not it's obviously a dynamic model. It's actually another patent we have. We are able to keep not throw you some questions that we know the answer for, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But then we can reduce that if we understand you're doing a good job, or come back again, or tell you stop, go take a break. And so those are some interesting challenges we had to solve, let alone the problem of language detection and evaluation of your skill sets in a language. This is because oftentimes people don't they speak English in different degrees, but how do you know if this person actually speaks Arabic, even though they almost certain tasks are subjective? So here's the thing: there are the objective and subjective tasks. Understanding subjectivity, which is another algorithm we create with cross-checking with other people, and understanding that you are still a native speaker of Arabic, even though you could technically fake your way half the way. Understanding the validity of your work is another technical challenge that is very interesting.
Wow, there is a lot of different things to work on. This is very interesting. I agree with you. I'm sure data scientists should be excited by the ability to work with so many interesting cases and investigations. Where do you see this evolve? Obviously, the marketplace will be fulfilled with all 3 types of data, but for this specific, for the simulated data, your pipelines that you have in the company, how do you see them evolve over time?
We now have a much more customer-driven approach, because we decided that being proactive about AI with the speed that things evolve is somehow slowing us down in terms of development. We are seeing now, besides other types of data being requested, multimodal data being requested. So multimodal is the ultimate challenge. It's when you have different signals in the same, and this is a good example, a meeting like this, where we have a conversation, we are moving, you can technically detect time aligned the synchronicity between my how I move, how I nod, my facial expression. Same thing with you. So the multimodal component, because it's different levels of segmentation, is exploding, especially in the content moderation side of it. So this is an easy case. Now imagine you are a streaming content company where you have sellers all the time putting videos, live videos of their own products, but you have outliers that people is starting a movement again, a national, a local movement against something. How do you control a mob that can be initiated through a platform that is not supposed to be social media, but it's social, and in real time you can detect toxicity or aggressiveness in the content. So these are some of the problems we are solving alongside our customers, because the shapes and forms of new content creation and multi-model content creation are so many that's interesting, right?
It is. And in moderation, you mean that it's not enough to just listen to your voice, what you're talking about. You need to also observe the video stream to see what kind of gestures you make, what kind of facial expressions you make. That's what makes it challenging, right?
Exactly, because sometimes you may be saying something, but you may be showing something else, and those are some of the challenges. Now, even more problematic, and something that is very dear to me, is content moderation live in children's platforms, or social media that is more used by children, like Snapchat. It's not necessarily only children, but the fact that the content disappears after the whole group has done a ton of bullying to each other, but you don't. There's also no track record unless someone screenshots it. Also poses a lot of problem. So there's all of these are challenges of creating data that can learn. This is a simulation that can teach a model in real time to detect these types of patterns, even if they are instantaneous. The future of our simulation models are always keeping up with the new problems.
Gotcha. There's one would argue that it's even too hard of a problem to try to simulate these edge cases because people creativity is so abundant and people are so ingenious that they will adapt to the changes. So what is the benefit of trying to simulate it versus just using the data that has been collected by the system itself, annotating it as examples of bullying behavior, for example, and using it as a training set?
It's more because if first of all, using real data, you got to have consent of it, and lots of times after GDPR, companies are shying away from that, or customers are opting out in terms of usage of their data. So starts with that. Now it's more and more our marketplace becomes more relevant after GDPR. So that's one thing. The second thing is it's when the problem of content moderation, trust and safety, which is what we're talking about right now here, is not. It's that it's usually 1% of the It's the 1% of the data, or 0.5% of the data has the problem like that. The majority of the data doesn't. So actually, mining where that is so much more cost expensive than coming up with, even if it's simulated scenarios, with role played scenarios, coming up with something that at least gives a head start to the model. So it's just the head start, and the not looking for a needle in a haystack, and actually simulate the needle immediately from the beginning. Even though we know it's never going to be fully broad enough to collect all the reality of the human creativity.
Right. And does it mean that at some point you think organizations will be able to build some sort of a baseline models from that simulated data, or not simulated, but all the three sources of the data put together, and then use the baseline models to fine tune them in house with their specific data sets. And that's the way for the models to be built in the future.
Absolutely. And that's how a lot of the large organizations and the effort in the NAIR, the task force for AI, is all moving towards to have a world where jumpstart an AI initiative with uh, basic models pre-trained with generic data and open source ideally, but not necessarily. Actually, the open source is one movement, but everybody knows that it's a good start, a good test kit, but it's never going to be the only solution. So absolutely, this is where the push to democratize AI is what a lot of the big five tech companies and other companies are doing. They, of course, everyone has their own agenda, but the US government as well to reduce the gap between those who have a lot of resources to build uh, uh, huge language models like Google, and those who are starting and have an edge, but they can't compete at the resource level. And to get them at least at the level that they can have a chance is what we're doing here.
Yeah, the open source models, as you mentioned, have some challenges around the consent. And specifically, I think all of them, Stable Diffusion and DALI, and they all are positioned as research models and not
Non
commercial use
commercial. Yes,
models, exactly for that reasons. So that's where you plan to offer an alternative that is completely clean from this rights, author
absolutely.
rights perspective. Okay, what are some of your favorite case studies of customers using your data in real life? What kind of interesting stories you've seen over the years?
Well, we are interesting cases and proud cases. We are very proud to have powered Watson Assistant for the last 4 years in terms of language expansion, speech to text models, and a lot of other data required to build Watson. Watson, not even though IBM is one of the most iconic companies in the world, they were the first ones, alongside with Apple Siri, to bring conversational AI to the picture, because it was only command and control until 2011. Apple Siri brought Siri, and IBM brought Watson. We've been very proud to have powered 20 plus enterprise level agents, assistants, virtual assistants to the world. Another thing we're very proud of, and honestly, probably I will have to use different terminology. We were able to power a big translator consumer product based out of Cupertino with 100 more than 100 pairs of languages to do machine translation automatically. But we also did some interesting things with Microsoft, handwriting recognition. Very a type of sourcing. Back in the day when we did it, it was not it was still exclusive. We were giving the first steps on our marketplace. Now we want more of that data in our marketplace. But handwriting simulations, because every background learns, every culture teaches you a certain calligraphy, and depending on your level of education, you also write in a different way. So, And also women and men have calligraphies that are different. All of these are now. What's the challenge for optical recognizer of calligraphy and translate it into actual characters, digital characters? So this was a very cool project we did for a few years and several cultures that we don't have in the marketplace, unfortunately. But yeah, that was another cool one.
You basically worked with almost every company that
All
does
the
something
companies
important
building.
in AI.
But now, since the last few years, we are now able to power companies that are not the Fortune 500, like Unifor, like which is a very successful case in the conversational AI space, like Clear, that we are starting to work with. So all the companies that are not still known, but not the big Fortune 500. And why? Because we are also helping to democratize AI.
Right. That sounds good. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you, your personal journey, and how you started the company, maybe going all the way back. And you went to academia to work on NLP. So why did you decide to choose this as your field of study, and why NLP and crowdsourcing?
Well, because the funny thing is that even lots of people don't know about me is that I graduated in literature and linguistics. And at that point, I had a big passion uh, about reading and about literature. Another passion on languages, and actually very good at them. I've learned 6 languages. I'm proud to have learned 6 languages and being more or less fluent depending on the type of skill on each one of them. So that gives you a view. That gives you the baseline to be able to program languages from an engineering perspective. So when I finished my degree, my bachelor's in out of Portugal, this was Portugal in 2000. I stumbled into an opportunity to join a research group, an academic research group, building the first text to speech system in Portuguese for blind people. And any of these technologies back then were only in the accessibility world. It was an accessible. From accessibility, we went to mainstream, but that was only the goal. And the first challenge I had was, okay, we have to code Portuguese. And this is the year 2000. People are still building rule-based models, not data-driven models. There was nothing in the data-driven space yet. So we need to be able to translate a language into programming language that can respond to if and then decision tree. So that's how I started working, even though I had to learn how to code and program, and I went through. So was basically I was the only person able to translate, and how and why? Because languages in reality are are codable. In fact, not all of the languages behave in a predictive way. That's a good point too. Somehow, Romance languages tend to be very more predictive than other languages. Like, for example, when you have a very large distance between graphemes and phonemes, like in the Chinese system, you have immediately a huge barrier to convert to do a one-on-one match or and disambiguation. But it's not the case with Romance languages. So suddenly I am coding a language, translating into coding language, able to recognize, to have an accuracy at different levels at 98%, be able to expand it quickly to Brazilian Portuguese and other variants of Portuguese, because then it's a phonetic problem, And that's how my journey into AI started. From rules and academia to more rules than Microsoft, and then from rules at Microsoft to data driven, statistically driven models when we were hit by neural networks and big computing power, and the scale changed, and cloud, which was not existent until the 2010s decade, all of that was the trigger to completely change the approach.
You don't often see literature background in AI entrepreneurs. So I wonder if you were actually always inclined to do more techy things, and literature education was just so to say, a small deviation.
I would say that languages are, even though they are classified within humanities, it's actually this is a scientific discipline, and especially linguistics as a whole, as the language science. It is a science, and it so much that we are now seeing it completely merged into AI, and all the human-computer interaction is based on linguistics and computational linguistics. Now, the funny thing about literature is that, so my master's, then I moved to a master's, and I moved to a PhD in voice technology. So PhD was fully the completion of my project in a rule-based project of coding the Portuguese language and all its variants into a computational language that was understandable by a text-to-speech and a speech recognition system. But in between, I did a master's in argumentation, political argumentation, and which already had lots of ingredients of, because I was already working in research in the language technology space. The interesting side of that was going a few levels up to semantics and pragmatics, which is different levels of linguistics that deal with something that is less codable, but that then gives me the foundation to be a better entrepreneur. I didn't even know that, but the point is, dominating a language from an argumentation perspective standpoint allows you to sell, to be a great salesperson first, because you're selling your ideas through argumentation, allows you to do a better pitch. There's maybe a reason why I am the only woman in AI who raised more VC capital in the world, because I was able to convince someone to to trust my plan, my idea, my team, my company. But I was testing this all the way, and this is one of these fundamental skills that every entrepreneur has to have. It has to be able to pitch, and pitching is to an employee, to bring a talent in, to an investor, to a client, to a partner. All the time, you're pitching all the time. So it turns out that it's probably the most important skill to have.
Did you have any inclinations on working on technology when you were younger, like in school or as a kid?
So I was always fascinated by computers when they started, but I had very limited access to them. My first phone, I mean, the first phone we had in our place that was called a mobile phone was a phone connected to a car. That was a mobile phone. And so it was wired to a car, and that was the mobile phone concept. And the first time I saw a computer was in college, which was when I was able to access the first Windows system. And by the moment I finished my degree and I start in this research project in engineering, in an engineering school, I that's when my world opened up and thought, oh my God. But I didn't. I grew up in a world where I mean, if I now say that Europe is 10 years behind in AI, lost the cloud train, and the United States invested just last year 55 billion in AI, followed by China 17, and the rest of the world is not even considering anything of magnitude. You imagine what in the years of 96 to 2000, Europe was even further behind. So uh, yes, I was always super interested, but this was science fiction until I got into the engineering school to join this research team to build the TTS system, and that's when my world changed, because my learning curve uh, took off, because once there, access to programming classes, access to supercomputers, in my opinion, back then, that was how everything kicked off. And Microsoft came later in my life, and even gave the extra lift that I needed to put things together, experience a global company solving a global problem right in my skill sets, and not many people able to build the bridge between different disciplines, because this was, I guess, my edge at that point.
Yeah, maybe because you had no access to computers at earlier ages, you had to find your passion in something else and pour yourself into language. So
And literature.
you never know if lack of computers was a bad or good thing in that sense, I think. But you did spend a few years with Microsoft, and you lived in Portugal, in China, in the US. So I wonder what kind of cultural observations you've made of these three so different cultures, and what are the most interesting takeaways from that experience?
Well, I would say also that uh, languages and literature were my first channels to travel without being able to travel to other cultures and other mindsets. Because when you're learning a language, when you're reading literature that is done by someone else, you are already traveling to that mindset. So I was always very open to to cultures and the world, and moving. Uh, Microsoft really changed my life. I owe a lot to my learning and my even career opportunities to Microsoft. I've learned a lot. It gave me an opportunity to be at my best in a time where I had endless resources to explore. Even though I had to pitch, I still had to sell my ideas all the time. But I had endless resources to explore the world of language expansion and data expansion in human-computer interaction, conversational AI. So that's what I was building with Microsoft, conversational AI across 50 languages. So I was able in the first 4 years in Portugal to travel the world, uh, recording voice talents, casting voice talents, creating processes and patent processes around how to create the best text to speech system in the world. Some of the voices we still have on our Windows kits and Bing kits were done by me and my teams back then. Um, but I was also able to see uh, it. I mean, moving Europe was definitely a good place to build language expansion, because it's the area, and Microsoft put a center there because it's a small region with a cocktail of languages right there. It's relatively easy to have access to the talent and scale up quickly several languages right there. uh, I immediately was working with our group in Beijing, who was building text to speech, which was my area PhD. So I had to travel many times to China. I remember having a cultural shock the first few times I went there. Cultural shock in several angles. The the role of women in higher. Women are workers. Women it's a working class, but they don't have access to positions of power. Not that they had more in Europe or the US, but in those years it was more obvious. Now I think things are a little bit more even. Women are still very underrepresented, but everywhere, but more even to the rest of the world. Uh, I remember having cultural shock in terms of pollution. It was something that I struggled with when I moved there, being sick all the time, to be honest, until I got past that. But I've learned amazing things about uh, how the solidarity in the US. If you are in a high mode, if you are successful, everybody's your friend. But in China, people actually surround you with a network of support, not very dissimilarly from Europe, from what I see in Europe. Being more so, something about the socialist concept of helping each other, even if you are in a weak position, or if you're a foreigner. In my case, I was in a weak position because I was a foreigner and I didn't speak the language. And many times I couldn't have a lift anywhere because nobody would take me because I wouldn't speak the language. And so far, or I couldn't, or I had a problem with um, uh, my rent with my rental, and I couldn't fix it because I couldn't understand myself. Couldn't make myself understood. So there was all of these frustrating things. But people had a support system. People would help me. Be above and beyond of examples of gratitude that I've never experienced in the US, for example. So just to say that I have a great respect for how China has evolved, especially my generation, who still remembers going shoeless to school, who barely had food in the plate, and suddenly they see access to education. They now can afford an apartment, maybe if they're lucky, one car. So all of these are huge social steps that they are very grateful to the government, and the Western world sees it a little bit different. Um, Europe is still very socialist in that sense. Um, you in a crisis, in a COVID crisis, you don't see people going homeless from overnight because the state doesn't allow that. The state will protect the weaker ones at least to get through that. Sometimes too much, or people take too much time to get over it. But you don't see the social gap that you see in the US, where if everything is fine, everybody's happy, we're all friends. If something changes in the economic situation of a person, the person sees themselves overnight in the street. Even though the success the opportunity you have in the United States is unparalleled. It's very difficult for someone to reach so quickly social ladder status, social climbing anywhere else in the world. So this is the disadvantage. But for the weaker, it's really challenging, or for those who can't survive as well. And the other places of the world, while they don't promote the social climbing so fast, they also don't let you go down so quickly. So pros and cons.
Everyone can pick their environment, the one that they
Absolutely.
prefer. The only barrier is languages. You know six, so it's a bit easier for you, a bit harder for some other folks. By the way, what are those six languages?
What are the languages? So Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, a bit of Chinese, otherwise I wouldn't have survived there, and Latin. And Latin is not a spoken language, but I mean, I had a lot of Latin in my life. It's foundational for every Romance language. And it's a very interesting, different structure, uh, different type of language that gives you, that makes your, they say it's the math, the closest to math in the language, in science of languages, because it's very predictive but very complex.
Okay, a couple of last questions. You're part of a NAIR task force for US President Biden's administration. I wonder what's the goals of the group and how did you get involved?
I got involved a bit randomly through one of our team members who got in their feed that they were building an advisory group, and they had a very short window, and he thought that to make the connection. I spoke with the office of the CTO, with Lynn Parker, Dr. Lynn Parker, who was in the office of the CTO, who immediately, after a couple of meetings, invited me formally to join. And at first, I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into, to be honest. This was 18 months of pro bono advisory group with a very sharp, talented group of people working really. But what I fell in love with was with the fact that the mission of the task force was to democratize the building, the access and the building of AI to beyond the big five tech companies, fully resourced, which is exactly what I'm doing with our marketplace. In the data aspects of it, and only data, not everything else, tools and models. But the mission was so aligned. And at the same time, I was the only entrepreneur representing the SMEs, the small and medium businesses. There's a Google representative, but there's nobody else. There's a lot of agents. There's Stanford, obviously. There's people that represent the several agencies that have investments in AI, but there's no SME presence, especially in AI. So big responsibility to represent our segment of SMEs precisely. Oh, but bringing also the more pragmatical and commercial and down to earth business perspective that is missing a lot of the people who are not in the day to day running a business. So we completed the report. It's presented in. It was supposed to be this month. It moved to January 1st or 2nd week, and there will be now a 5-year plan where there's an open RFP to really govern this strategy of AI from a more governance perspective. It will be under an agency, definitely, possibly the NSF. But the RFP to govern this, and there will be a budget, and there will and really a lot of what we said, and there's many chapters we covered and many subgroups, but a lot of this is very in line with the marketplace that we are already building.
What's your lessons learned from that experience? What went well? What were surprises for you?
What went well is that I really got to know incredible sharp people that are doing big strides in AI and have lots of experience. I did struggle a little bit with the very heavily academic angle of it, even though I come from academia. I can't be always in every task and subtask group, but there was so materializing this into a concrete and to create actionable plan was always not always clear to me, and sometimes frustrating to bring everything together. Um, I of course, I would love to see this moving faster. I do think for the amount of work we had, it went fairly quickly. But we're talking the speed that we move in a startup is not the speed the government moves. So of course, this is a little bit too long for my level of patience, especially now that we're initiating another 5 years. And I feel like 5 years is a long time. We need to be faster. We need to be faster. And that was the common sense across the whole group. We can't wait another 2 years to land the RFP, to start governing this. So, but we are talking about government, and I mean, my experience with other governments is not faster. It is what it is. But I think what I'm very happy with is that it's the first time I see a country mobilizing a really big initiative um, to divide power of innovation.
Right. And since the urgency is filled by the participants, then maybe it's going to move a bit faster than your regular government initiative. But you also have another stream of work in Portugal. Talk about that project. What are your goals there?
So, in parallel, I've been advising the government of Portugal in a lot of digital transformation. It's called digital transformation over there initiatives, where, of course, AI is one of the lines of that power of digital transformation. And 2 years ago, I have initiated a pitch to the government, to the Prime Minister, Minister of Economy, President, and a number of other ministers, saying that, well, Europe is 10 years behind the United States and 10 billion a year behind the United States in investment. Europe already lost the cloud train, and yet Europe is struggling to trust American companies in the cloud side of it. So are we going to also lose the train in AI? So why don't we start now? And COVID hit, and wasn't 750 billion of euros allocated to recovery and resilience plan of Europe. Each country of the 27 member states submitted a plan. Portugal did as well and received a chunk of that plan. That needs to be spent in recovery and resilience, and nothing better to one of the technologies to be resilient in moments of pandemic are AI. Is AI, because AI is indifferent to pandemics, indifferent to shutdowns, indifferent to it's not the same thing as if you are developing a manufacturer or if you are dependent on tourism, which is the majority of the GDP in Portugal is tourism. So in a pandemic, Portugal saw no one arriving to Portugal, and that was a huge hit. So 2 years later, we won the first project of this AI hub in Portugal, which is conversational AI. It's called Accelerate AI. It's a 30.4 million euro deal, out of which we are the consortium leaders. The European projects work in consortia. They work like that. You can, unless they are direct RFP, which is very rare to get something like that with that amount to do something off the bat. And it's to build conversational AI. Why are we building a conversational AI product? Because the big 5 tech companies have developed conversational AI for the 15 top GDP countries in the world. Portugal is number 49. So it will be a long route to get there. But it's not just Portugal. It's a number of other countries that are anywhere after the 15 GDP, that because these technologies are expensive. We are also coming from a data angle. We are the experts in data. We have a marketplace of data, and we actually are able to jumpstart conversational AI much faster with our marketplace in really any language from a small data perspective and not a big data perspective, which is the traditional approach of the big five tech companies. So this idea uh, uh, I sold this idea to the government of Portugal, and here we are in a 3-year project developing a product first for Portugal, but really for a number of countries that are beyond the GDP 15, and that we want to bring B2B and not consumer products, B2B enterprise level virtual agents.
This is a very ambitious project. Is it structured like a separate company that will be for profit, or how does it work?
That's a great question. And again, why conversational AI in Europe? Because Europe is not building; they're buying. So it's the same thing. Europe and APAC and South America, though US and China build, the rest of the world buy. We cannot go with the marketplace of data to the rest of the world because people don't know what to do with our marketplace of data. They buy an end-to-end solution. So ambitious, yes. It could be structured in a different entity. The entity awarded is Defined AI because we have to follow a very strict protocol of requirements to be accepted. So it would be very unusual to award to a non-existing company a project of this size. But the future is open. We'll see what's happening in the next couple of years of this project. It can have a life of its own at some point.
Why not? And yeah, hope it's gonna flourish and gonna grow into something huge. For our last question, let's talk about the your vision, your vision for Defined AI long term.
Definitely materializing my vision of being the GitHub of AI. Data for builders, models for buyers. And so we are still in the first 5 years of building the data marketplace. Depending on how fast we go here, and as you can see, I already introduced the conversational AI product, which is a model for buyers, for users, for those who are buying AI and not building. We definitely want to be the GitHub of AI for the world, the trustworthy place, safe place to get data and buy models that are transparent, responsible, unbiased, fair, ethical, which a lot of people use those words. The reality is that what's happening under the hood is very different. And we have established a reputation in the ethical AI that I'm very proud of. And we want to continue to attract and curate partners and data and models that fulfill those requirements.
Sounds good. How can listeners learn more about Defined AI? Where can they follow you on social media? I know you're also hiring, so what are the job positions that they can apply to?
We have a website that is the Defined.ai. We have a getdata.defined.ai, which is our marketplace. This will be one in the next 2-3 months, and only one place. And we have the Nivo platform, which is our crowdsourcing platform, and that was purposefully separated because it is really a different audience. So we have social media for each one of them. Define AI and Marketplace is just one. Nivo is another one. Nivo spelled Neevo. We have our social media from myself on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. myself and the company. And yes, we are hiring a number of positions for Accelerate AI. And that is a big adventure because the positions need to be moved to Portugal. And that's the requirement of the Portuguese government, which can be an exciting adventure for some people out there. And we are looking, so that those are the head of the program, the person, and the director of machine learning for Accelerate AI. And we have this high level, the biggest positions, and the head of partnerships for marketplace and channels, which is another position. So yeah, exciting things. There's a number of other less senior positions, but those are the most important ones.
Okay, we'll link all those notes, all those links to the show notes, and these are really exciting positions, especially the ones giving you an opportunity to travel and live in a different country, in a different culture. Daniela, thanks a lot for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Artem. It was great. Thanks.